Today we're going to continue our discussion about the United States and Canada among the nations. It is a fact that in population, the United States is number 3 in the world as far as the number of people that live here. Only China and India have more. Canada, as far as land mass, is second only to Russia. But the fact of the matter is that there are less than 25% of Americans would be considered evangelicals. I know the book says 26%, but that was done based on 2007 numbers. So really we're looking at a nation that's not as evangelical as most of us like to think. As a matter of fact, most people in the United States, when they talk about missions, when they talk about reaching the world, when they talk about evangelism and the Great Commission, they talk as if America, the United States, is the only one who's doing anything about trying to reach the world. And that's actually not true. Granted, North America has the largest Christian population. That's true. But the continent is best understood as a post-Christianized environment. There was a time that there was a great many more percentage of Americans who were Christians than there are now. And that kind of changes things. So we have to think in those terms. Are we still a society that was built on Christian principles? Yes. Is our Judeo-Christian values entrenched in our Constitution? Yes. Are many of our laws based on the Judeo-Christian teachings of Scripture? Yes. But the society, the everyday people who are walking and working now on U.S. soil, the vast majority of them are not evangelical Christians. As a matter of fact, they're lost. Look on page 402 and let me share this with you. Look at the countries that are more evangelical. For example, Kenya, 49% claim to be Christian. Uganda, where I work in the north, 37%. Central African Republic, or CAR as we call it, 32%. El Salvador, 32%. Zimbabwe and Nigeria, both at 31%. Even Nicaragua is 30%. The country south of Uganda, Burundi, is 27%. So even the nation of Burundi has a greater Christian population, percentage-wise, than does the United States. Now I want to let that sink in for a few moments. That the countries that I just named, countries that we typically think are mission fields, Kenya, Uganda, CAR, El Salvador, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, Nicaragua, Burundi, they have a greater percentage of evangelical Christians than we have here in the United States. There are many mission trips that are taken to these foreign countries, and those are wonderful things. They're needful things. But it should cause us pause to think, why are we losing so much ground here in the United States? What is the solution? Where do we go from here? What is it we need to understand? Well, one of the things we need to understand is that we live in a post-Christian field. I don't think anyone can really argue statistically that America is not as Christian as it once was. So, in the shadow of the steeple has diminished in the West, leaving behind a church that has little influence or value according to society. There was a study done not long ago that said that pastors and churches, as far as trustworthiness, rank just above used car salesmen. And let me tell you, beloved, that is a horrible indictment against the church. We need to understand all these things that are going on, this post-Christian West. We need to think about it in terms of what God has called us to do. We need to be wise. We need to be understanding. We need to look carefully at what that means for us. Now, I want you to listen to me very carefully. If you believe that you were fearfully and wonderfully made, if you believe that God has a purpose for your life, then this is the time in which God placed you. It's the time in which God placed me. Knowing that, then God has given us all that we need to minister to this culture in this time in human history. So we must make sure we do our due diligence to understand where we are. And I'm going to talk a little bit, and it's here in your book, about shifts. And the first one is we have shifted from simple to complex. Whenever the gospel enters an area, it often does so with great simplicity. People hear about the Creator God. They hear about sin. They hear that God holds us responsible for our personal sin, and that God has made provision through His Son, Jesus Christ. When they hear those elements of the gospel and they're given the opportunity to respond, they respond and are saved. Their life takes on a new trajectory. It is with great simplicity. Communication methods and models to imitate are often those that approach the unbeliever, eventually new believers, with the basics in mind. You give your heart and life to Jesus Christ, you begin to grow and follow Him. Such biblical simplicity helps foster rapid dissemination of the gospel and the multiplication of disciples, leaders, and churches. The gospel message is simple. They present it to friends and family simply. They respond simply. And they begin to read the Bible, meet together, worship, and they form a church. However, as the gospel spreads and churches develop and mature, infrastructure and systems and organizations become more and more complex. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, okay? In fact, it in many cases is a sign of a healthy church. However, it does present some challenges. Complexity hinders the rapid spread of the gospel and multiplication of churches and leaders. It even hinders overall sanctification. You say, well, what do you mean? Well, You go into a new area that's never heard the gospel, and you preach the gospel, they respond, and people are being saved, and a church starts, and as it spreads, there are other little congregations that start. Okay, it's very simple. Okay, the basics. But as that church is in existence for a longer period of time, that church, the first church that you started, we'll call it First Baptist Church of, anywhere, First Baptist Church anywhere. As they begin to grow, they begin to form structures that are common to them. They may have a greeter committee. They may have a finance committee. They'll have a deacon body. They'll have a Sunday school director. They'll have a brotherhood, a WMU. They'll have the property and grounds committee. They'll have the flower committee. So all of these structures become part of the church. It makes it more complex. So much so that oftentimes there is a shift. They're no longer focusing on evangelism. They're focusing on getting positions filled in their complex organization. It's about not reaching the outlying communities with the gospel. It's about building up the membership of their own church. So it's shifted from simple to complex. There's also a shift from apostolic to pastoral. With maturing church comes the need for developing leaders. Again, this is good. But what began with missionaries planting churches from outside the harvest has now resulted in the need for more and more pastoral training. Elders are needed to oversee churches and to equip them for doing the work of ministry. What started as people asking the question that the Philippian jailer asked, "What must I do to be saved?" They've now shifted, and it's, how do I faithfully follow Jesus? So you see, there's been a shift in the thinking of the church. When the first church first starts, it is, what must I do to be saved? But over the course of time, as you get more and more believers, they start asking the question, how do I follow Jesus more faithfully? So the dynamic of the church has shifted from that apostolic, and I'm using the terms not as one of the 12 apostles, I'm using the term of being sent out ones, okay? So what has turned from that apostolic organization, or that apostolic spirit of planting churches, has shifted to a pastoral mentality. That's, like I said, that's not always a bad thing, but I'm just telling you, this shift happens. I'm trying to walk you through this so you'll understand. After that happens, there's another shift that takes place, and that is the shift from apostolic missiology to pastoral missiology. Now, over time, missions in such society becomes filtered through the pastoral lens instead of the missionary lens. In other words, what happens is not how can I reach these people, but it's how can I lead these people. So it turns Um, what began with the apostolic leadership crossing cultural lines in order to establish a church, churches began to do evangelism with people culturally like themselves. We're not interested in winning the world. We're interested in winning our next door neighbor, somebody who is just like me. Again, there's an aspect of this that is good, and it's the expected result. However, the problem arises when these disciple making methods and missiology to support those methods are more conducive to reaching people of a similar culture as the church, rather than the church doing the work of evangelism. So the ideology behind the church is we want to reach more people like ourselves. We want to make our church larger. We want to reach the people that will come to our church. Do you see the subtlety here? Instead of being minded of the Great Commission, reaching the lost, our focus becomes a little bit more narrow, and we're focused more on reaching the people around us. So your missionary ideas, your missiology, goes from being one sent out to win the world to just reaching our neighbors. So there's a shift in the missionology from apostolic to pastoral. Now, not only when you do that, but it also changes your methods. For example, missionary methods, okay, are thinking about winning the lost everywhere they can. Church planting churches, leadership development. But a pastoral approach to missionary activity, especially in a post-Christianized context, is not necessarily a failure to think and to function missionally, but rather to apply a pastoral approach to the missionary labors. A pastoral missiology and the methods derived from it are geared more toward maintenance, okay, and the conservation of structures and organization. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's the nature of a pastoral ministry to care for the flock. And while a pastor should be apostolic and missionaries should be pastoral, in North America, the expectation is for missionaries to identify themselves as pastors and function according to pastoral methods. Yet when missionaries function primarily as pastors, and pastors primarily as missionaries, frustration problems often arise. There's a different calling between a missionary and a pastor. They're two different callings, but they also result in two different philosophies and two different methodologies. For example, on the mission field, we will try to minister to the needs of people in a way that we can show the love of Christ in a practical way. That may be open air crusades, it may be meeting medical needs, it may be starting schools, it may be giving lectures on how to do certain things in a better way, farming institutions, or water conservation, or health and hygiene. And we're trying to do that to allow people to learn something and hear the gospel. Whereas, and we will go anywhere, all over different villages, but a pastoral methodology is to figure out a way to get people to come into the church. So we will have special events at our church. We will show movies at the church. We will have a block party at the church. We will have Vacation Bible School at the church. We will. Do you see the pattern here? Everything is done missionally for the growth of the church, whatever church that you happen to be pastoring. So there's a different mindset. So let's look for a minute at theologies and missions. As I've already stated, missionaries and pastors are not the same. Their methods are not the same. Their calling, their giftedness is not the same. Theology shapes missiology. Missiology shapes field practices. What is believed about the Bible influences what people do. For example, how one answers the question, what is a church, will affect everything that church planting team does. Ecclesiology will determine the team's strategy, the methods that they use, the resources that they need, who can serve as an elder, and so on. If the church understands itself from the perspective of a well-established, mature body, with all the structures and organizations that have developed over centuries, then she will labor to plant that understanding in the post-Christianized context. For example, Bellevue Baptist Church is a great church. But if I were to go today in South Memphis to plant a Bellevue Baptist Church, I couldn't do it. Because I don't have the multi-million-dollar resources that Bellevue does. I can't plant a church where I have a missions team and an evangelist team and a music team and a drama team and a deacon, 120 deacons, and it's too complex. I can't reproduce a Bellevue Baptist Church. You understand? What you believe about missions, what you believe about what pastors do and what missionaries do, it's not the same. I can't reproduce a Bellevue model. It has grown over the years to the place where it is now. It didn't just start that way. Now, let me talk just for a minute, because not only do I have over 30 years of pastoral experience, not only do I have over 20 years of missional experience, the two aren't the same. The outlooks aren't the same. The methodology isn't the same. So, what is needed in North America? Well, first of all, we need a new understanding of our field. All of America doesn't have the evangelical mindset like we used to. If you found yourself on a mission field and you got in trouble, used to, you could send word and someone would sound the alarm that there was a missionary, an evangelical missionary, somewhere in the world, and it would get national attention. And there would be people calling the State Department and getting involved to help rescue this missionary. Not only would that not happen today, it wouldn't make the national news. So we need a new understanding of the field in which we're working. It is a post-Christian society that we're ministering to. The gospel is still the same. The gospel never changes. The message of the gospel never changes. People's need for the gospel never changes. But we need a different understanding. Second, we need a new model. How are we going to reach our world, of which 75% of those in the United States are lost? You're either a missionary in that sense, or you're a mission field. Every day when you walk out your door, you're walking into a mission field. With the thousands of immigrants, millions of immigrants living in the United States, I guarantee you, you're going to cross the path of one today. Somebody who was not native born here, but they're here. So we need a new model to think about, how do we do missions? He talks about in the book about being scaffolds. Scaffolds are used to build things, okay? But then once it's built, you take the scaffold down, you move on to the next job site. Most people don't want to do that. If something works and something's helping their church grow, they don't want to send it someplace else. They want to keep it. Well, we need a new model, okay? We need to be able to say, we have to do both. We have to pastor those long-time believers so that they can continue to grow in sanctification. But we also need to have in mind, we need to reach new converts, not only a new generation, but the people around us. We need to be intentional in our missionary efforts. Even if that means planting a church of a different cultural setting than what we're used to. At Leawood Baptist Church, we have not only an American service, which is multi-ethnic, but we also have a Sudanese church, and their service, they worship in Arabic. We also have Constelacion, an Hispanic church, who meets and worships in Spanish. Why? Because we have a lot of Hispanics in this community. We need a new model of how to do things. Is it important that everybody in my community come to my church? No. But it is important that everybody in the community have a church that they can go to, that they feel comfortable, that ministers to them. Really what we need is a new vision. We need to understand, not only are we here to pastor those that have been saved for a long time, to encourage them to continue to grow, but we also need a new vision of reaching the unreached people and not putting on them any extra burden. You say, what do you mean any extra burden? Sometimes they don't need the heavy structure of 14 committees and 15 people to talk to ask about getting a door opened, 20 minutes before the service. Sometimes simpler is better. They need to be able to do both. we need to rethink our methodology. We need to rethink our model. We need to always apply biblical principles in everything we do and not allow ourselves to get sidetracked in our own cultural understanding of the gospel.